All right, welcome back to East Texas Now. We're joined here by a very special guest here at the East Texas Now. We have Greta Van Susteren.
Close enough. Everyone gets it wrong.
Susteren. She is the new chief political analyst for Grey Television. Is that correct?
I am, Jeremy.
Okay, but you have had before that a pretty illustrious career.
Either that or a long career.
A long career.
I've been at all the cable news, and I'm sort of the accidental anchor. And then I started off as a lawyer and practiced law and was perfectly happy practicing law. And when I was practicing law, there were no lawyers on TV except Perry Mason.
Right.
And here I am, accidentally.
Okay, so talk about how that accidentally happened.
Well, I was trying rapes and murders in Washington, D.C. as a criminal defense lawyer. And I also was as an adjunct professor at Georgetown Law School. And William Kennedy Smith, who was a Kennedy heir, got himself into a little bit of a fix. CNN called me. They were going to go gavel to gavel. It was out of Florida, and Florida had just put cameras in the courtroom, or they had cameras in the courtroom. So I was doing gavel to gavel coverage of a short trial, and I never left.
Right.
I just stayed, basically. And one job turned into another job, turned into another job, and I basically walked away from the courtroom. But I loved the courtroom.
Right. So, well, if you could just, as your time as a lawyer before we get to the TV stars part of it, what were your favorite cases to try, or your most, the ones that you really got into the most?
Well, because I was in Washington, D.C., we did a lot of First Amendment work, protests at the White House. I once represented some nuns who chained themselves to the White House fence, and they got charged with something because you can't chain yourself to the White House fence. You can protest.
Right.
Protest is fine. It's the First Amendment, but you can't trespass. So I did, because I was in Washington, D.C. as a criminal defense attorney, and I started off representing poor people. I made about $12,000 a year for about 8 or 9 or 10, 11 years. But the protest work was the most interesting because, that's where you see America at its best. Because in a lot of countries you can't protest, but in the United States we have the protection of First Amendment, and you can stand outside and basically shout and scream at your politicians, maybe rude,
right?
But at least you're allowed to do it. And it was always, I was always proud to be an American. And I've traveled all over the world where we don't have freedom of speech or freedom of the press, and you have a real appreciation for the rights we have here.
Absolutely. So going from the courtroom to the news set, your first foray into television wasn't the O.J. Simpson trial, but that was the one that really kind of pushed you into the national spotlight, so to speak.
Indeed. In fact, even before CNN, I was on the local WJLA because our mayor then, Mayor Marion Barrett, got himself into a little bit of a fuss because, a little bit of a fix because he got caught with crack cocaine. So I actually provide some legal analysis on the courthouse steps, but I didn't get to the studio until CNN and William Kennedy Smith. And then 25 years ago, is when Nicole Brown Simpson was murdered, and because I was already about the only legal analyst CNN knew at the time, they said, "Okay, you'll do." And then they picked me.
Okay, so 25 years ago, it's been a long time since that case has happened, and of course it was at the time the trial of the century, one of the first major televised trials, and so. Now, 25 years later, of course, Ron Goldman's family is pushing back against what happened at the trial, pushing back against the jury and everything else. Do you have any sort of observations that come with the benefit of hindsight?
Well, first of all, there are a lot of people who say that it was a racially determined verdict because the way the American people felt about it was often racially divided. But there were 2 white people and Hispanic on the jury, and it was a unanimous verdict. And I think it's important to note, look, my heart bleeds for the Goldmans, and I've spent time with the Goldmans, the father of Ron Goldman and also the sister. And they have every right and every reason to be, something was taken from them, something very near and dear. But it's also important to note that juries are not asked if someone is innocent. That's not the question that juries are asked. They're asked simply whether or not a case has been proven beyond a reasonable doubt, and the judge will tell them in jury instructions, if you have a reasonable doubt that you must find not guilty. And there were peculiarities in that trial, and it's not inconceivable that someone could say, I don't know why that blood showed up on the gate 2 weeks later. I think he did it, but I just don't know why it showed up, and that's my one reasonable doubt, but I still think he did it, and have to vote not guilty.
Not guilty.
Yeah. But of course they're upset, the Goldmans. Wouldn't you be? I would be.
Absolutely.
They're a lovely family.
So, with your unique perspective, we all watched it on television from our living rooms, but you were kind of there as part of it with the whole media and the CNN thing. What were your takeaways from it as being in that position? Well,
first of all, what people don't realize is that I actually watched it from Washington, D.C. in a little tiny closet, almost studio, and I had a live feed, so I saw I didn't have commercials, so I saw everything there.
Right.
It is without a doubt different if you're actually in the courtroom. And what people also don't realize, when you're critical of the jury, is that the people who were on that jury saw a completely different case, different trial than people watching on TV.
Okay.
Because the jury oftentimes gets sent off into the jury room while the judge has a private discussion with the lawyers. And of course, we at home can hear this private discussion, and we hear discussions about evidence, and we hear they'll have an argument over evidence that maybe the judge won't let the prosecution introduce, but the jury never hears it. So I think the one thing people don't realize is the trial the jury saw is very different than the one the rest of us saw.
Right. Okay. Well, looking to something a little more topical, of course, you've been on cable news for a long time.
Long time.
And it seems like it's changed a lot.
Well, that's why I'm here.
Right.
I mean, if either cable news has changed or I've changed.
Mm-hmm.
When I got into cable news, I mean, this is my thinking. It was very exciting for me. I did a lot of legal cases, and then when I changed networks, I eventually traveled the world. I've been to North Korea 3 times. I've been to Iraq. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been all these places. But it seemed at some particular time in the last couple of years, it really became a much more of a situation, almost a team sport.
Right.
Do you like the Democrats or you hate
Yes.
the Democrats? Do you like the Republicans or hate the Republicans? And that's really not what journalism is about, and which is what is so attractive about the local markets, about Gray TV and about any other local markets, is that you find what I refer to as old-fashioned journalism, which is why we all got into the business or
Right.
fell in love with the business. I have friends at cable. I enjoyed my time at cable, but I don't want to be in a situation where I'm just moderating a fight or even getting involved in one. I want to
Right.
go out and see what's going on in the world.
Well, you mentioned the whole sports team aspect of it. So do you think it's the cable media pushing candidates in that direction or vice versa?
I think it's a combination. I think everyone is guilty. I think that the viewers are somewhat cheerleading in a particular viewpoint. I think social media has done it. I think the fact that news organizations, I'm not suggesting we should have government funded, but you can't deny the fact that a commercial news organization is worried about the bottom line.
Right.
And News Corp or CNN, they have to answer to shareholders every quarter. And if you send your reporters out into the field, it costs money. Whereas if you keep them in the studio, it doesn't cost money.
Right.
Now, one of the advantages here, here in Tyler, is that your reporters are already here. So when you had that shooting here in Tyler a number of years ago, for CNN or Fox to cover it, they had to send somebody here.
Right.
Costs a lot of money. You're right here. It costs you a lot less.
Yeah.
So naturally, with everyone worried about the bottom line, you're going to be more effective and you're going to be covering it more and you have more resources here because it costs so much. And I think part of the problem is that cable news has felt the economic pressure. People are cutting cable because they find out they can get it OTT, they can get it, they can watch this, for instance. So why would they spend the money for cable?
Right.
So I think there are a lot of forces. But the viewers say that they don't like it, but there are some that will still watch it.
Okay. Well, getting some more topical discussion topics here. We saw last night the interview with President Trump and George Stephanopoulos. And after the whole Mueller probe and everything else, he was pretty much asked point blank, if you were given information from a foreign government, would you take it? And he just said, yeah, totally would. So is that a gaffe on his part? Is that him not really understanding the scope of the investigation itself? Depends
on who you are, and that's really what we as journalists do. Is we lay it out, let the viewers decide. The viewers who perhaps are Trump followers, they won't see it as a gaffe, and they may see it as truthful speaking, or they may not see anything wrong with it. If you don't like Trump, you're going to have the reverse view. But I'll tell you one thing: cable news will tell you what to think about it.
Right.
Local news will lay it out for you and say this is what was asked to the president by George Stephanopoulos, and then let the viewers decide. So, I mean, that's a big difference, whereas I think you'd see this more as a sporting event, people taking sides on cable.
Right. Okay. Also, topically, I was watching an interview with CNN's Abby Phillip and Elizabeth Warren, and she asked her if her identity as a policy candidate is going to help her or hurt her in the primaries. And my question is, what does it say about the current climate that being the policy candidate is an identity and not the status quo?
Well, I think that perhaps Senator Elizabeth Warren likes to be the policy. She's sort of wonkish,
right?
And so, I mean, I think it's something that she embraces, and I think that's that's the message she wants to send out. Frankly, not agreeing or disagreeing with their positions, that's not a bad thing for a candidate to want to talk about policy.
Right.
We just talked a second ago about cable TV. Cable TV will push her away from it instead of discuss policy with her and find out what does she think about immigration on the border, what does she think of student loans, or big corporate America. They'll say something. President Trump just said this to George Stephanopoulos. What do you think about it?
Right.
So, that's where cable news will be a little bit of a jab and and not so necessarily push forward on journalism and facts, but sort of stir up a fight.
Okay. Well, speaking of local journalism, you have a new show premiering on all the great TV television stations. It's Full Court Press with Greta Van Susteren. Tell us about the show, what we could expect to see when we watch it.
Well, first of all, it's going to be a syndicated show, so beyond the Gray family of stations, it's going to be in other stations, which is great news for us. I mean, and I'm very excited about that. For instance, Grey doesn't have a New York City bureau, and it's a station. It'll be picked up there. Los Angeles, San Francisco, other stations, Arkansas, all over the country, other stations in the Gray. What I'm hoping, and I've been around the block enough to know, is that what you set out to do on your first show isn't necessarily what ends up to be the TV show, because TV shows evolve as you figure out what the appetite of the viewer is, what the viewer wants, and also as the news is so dynamic. It's not like news stays the same. What I'm hoping to do to make the show a little bit different, obviously I think that I'm different, just like all the Sunday morning show hosts are different, is when I was at the cable news, I had perhaps 4 bureaus for help. I might have San Francisco, LA, maybe Atlanta, but I had a few. Think about this. I now have 145 bureaus, which is 145 Gray stations. So if something happens in Anchorage, I can get it fast. Or if something happens in Tyler, I can get it fast. But I also have this. I have the depth of the reporters here in the community who know the story better, so that they can help. So they increase the value and the intelligence of the show, and they bring more facts to the people. And the other thing that I'm hoping to do is that you live in a community, and your community may have a problem. Like, let's say immigration is a big issue down here in Texas, and so naturally people talk about it a lot. But what I want to show America is immigration is not a Texas issue.
Right.
It's a national issue, and I want to somehow import the fact that issues are rather universal. You take immigration. If the president does decide after a while to impose tariffs on Mexico, that's going to affect my friends back home in Wisconsin, where I grew up. It's going to affect the tariffs in Japan, affect farmers in Iowa. I mean, it affects everybody. And student loans. That's not just a crisis here in Tyler. That's a universal problem. And what I want to do is to have the wealth of the reporters, not wealth financially, but I mean their rich experience, to bring those issues up that are really distressing to communities, show that it's rather universal. And then put the feet to the fire, the full court press on the candidate, saying, what are you going to do about it? Not is the other guy bad, or is the other guy dopey, or is the other guy something, but what are you actually going to do about it? And if you take something like student loans, if you had Senator Bernie Sanders on, he might say free college. And I go, great, that sounds like a great idea. Where are you going to get the money? Right. There'll be follow-up questions. Say, well, I'll raise taxes. And I'll say, that's great. Then everyone's going to start, doing other things to avoid taxes. And really pull the string and really sort of try to identify problems in local communities using the great depth of the local reporters, identifying them as having a national consequence, and then put the feet to the fire of politicians. They say they can fix it. They want your vote. Fine, but tell us how you're going to do it. But pull the string. It can't just be platitudes like free college or whatever it is.
Well, that kind of goes back to my other question, isn't it? So shouldn't it be just a default position for every candidate to be a policy candidate? Yes,
but policy is rather boring. I mean, the viewers, frankly, the truth is viewers will say, if you look at the minute-by-minute numbers on cables, viewers will say, I want more stories on human trafficking. And then they say, fine, you put a story on human trafficking, and the minute you get to human trafficking, click, the numbers decline, and they go to some food fight on your competitor.
Right.
So I think the voters/viewers, they have to want it too.
Right.
And so yes, on a purely intellectually, of course, it's bad that we can't. The policy isn't the discussion. Is not necessarily a badge of honor or something that someone uses to promote, and that the fighting gets more attention. Shame on us. And I don't mean journalism, but shame on all of us as voters.
Right. Do you think that there is a way for news outlets or media outlets to kind of maybe shape or change the priorities for voters and viewers?
I don't think we should shape the priorities or change the priorities of viewers. I think they should, but I think as a service industry, which I consider journalism, I think it behooves us to keep to our mission, which is to go out and get facts, go out and challenge, robust challenge of people who want to be in positions of power and find out what they have to say, and then let the viewer/voter make his or her own decision. But I think that we should not take the bait and necessarily get dragged down to the mud. If two politicians want to fight, sure, that's interesting. We'll put a little bit of it on TV.
Right.
Frankly, I'm interested in it as a viewer. I watch that stuff too. But it doesn't mean that it's be our whole diet. Give them a whole menu of things. In a half-hour show, you can put the stuff that's sort of electrifying about one insult versus another, but then move on, because people, at least my friends growing up, is they want to make sure their kids can pay off student loans or get into schools or whatever it is. We can do it. We don't have to overdo it.
Absolutely. So one last question, kind of a bit of a self-reflection question, but you've been doing this television thing for a very, very, very long time, and you've covered a lot of stories. Looking back over it, are there any stories you wish you would have covered differently or taken a different approach on?
I regret that the Natalie Holloway story, which I spent so much time on, and I got to know the family, missing Natalie Holloway as a high school student back in 2006 who disappeared in Aruba. I regret that I haven't gotten them the answer to what happened to their daughter. I still work the case. I get email back and forth with Joran Vandersloot, who's in prison for a murder in Peru, trying to get him to come clean and to get honest about it. But I regret that I've yet to finish it. So my regret more is that we in the news media, we cover stories.
Right.
And then we tend to move on.
Right.
And I don't like that, because when you go out and cover a story and the person who's sort of the victim or part of it, gets a lot of attention from the media and feels important, and all of a sudden the media goes, oh, never mind, we're going on to the next one. I don't like that part. And so to the extent that I can go back and finish complete stories that I started, I feel like I owe it to the families. And even if I don't broadcast it publicly, Beth Holloway is Natalie's mother. I contact her every 6 months and I tell her what I'm doing, so she knows that this was not me just gaming her.
Right.
I actually do care what happened to her daughter, and I do care that I get the facts and not just use her to boost ratings.
Okay. Well, Greta, Miss Van
whatever
Susteren,
whatever that name is. Everybody gets it wrong.
It was a wonderful time chatting with you.
Thank you very much.
Look forward to seeing your show premiere September 8th on several stations across the country.
Several stations, indeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for stopping by talking to us.
Jeremy.
We'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much. That's Greta Van Susteren. She is Gray TV's chief political analyst, and of course she'll be the host of Full Court Press, premiering across the country on September 8th. Make sure you stay tuned for that. Thanks again to her for stopping by and talking to us. We'll take a very quick break here on East Texas Now, but stick around because we're going to be right back.